It might sound old-fashioned, but knitting, crocheting, quilting, and sewing aren't just for grannies. I'm an example of this. I make and wear a lot of my own things for me and my family. I have a daughter, Aubriana, who is 3, and I make a lot of things for her. And when we're out and about, people compliment her on her clothes, and it usually goes something like this. "Oh, your skirt is really pretty. Thanks, my mom made it for me." And it doesn't matter if I actually made it, she thinks that I made her entire wardrobe. And I'm really delighted by this. It makes my hard work worth it. Since the Industrial Revolution, fewer and fewer of the things that we use on a daily basis have been made by hand. And while this has been really good for us in a lot of ways, it deprives us of some real advantages. And there is a satisfaction in making things that never goes out of style. And there are 3 facets to this that I'm going to tell you about today. First, by making my own things, I am honoring the women of the past. Secondly, I am building relationships. And thirdly, it's a form of artistic and self-expression. My mom taught me how to hand sew in kindergarten, and I really haven't stopped crafting since. I've worked as a professional designer in the crafting industry for the past 6 years, and I also run a crafting blog that gets about 400 hits a day from people all around the world. Handcrafting is a way to honor the women of the past. Okay, to really understand what I mean by that, I'm going to briefly trace the history of knitting. Knitting goes back to Egypt around 1100 AD. And it's really hard to say for sure when knitting started, but that's our first surviving example. And from there, it quickly spread to Europe. And the reason for this is because it's simpler than other methods that they were doing before. And knitting is stretchy and it fits well over your hands and feet. And before this in Europe, they were basically taking fabric and wrapping it around their feet and then tying it with string, which would not really be the most comfortable pair of socks you've ever worn. And if you look at your socks right now, and those little V's that you've got right there are knitting, and it's everywhere in the modern world. And so at first they had knitting guilds that were made up of master knitters, and they were made up entirely of men. And eventually what happened is that women started doing it, and they did it for a lot less money than men. So eventually it became a women's industry. And then we have, if we skip ahead quite a lot, we have World War I and World War II. And women back at home who wanted to support the war effort would knit socks and gloves and sweaters, balaclavas and hats for the soldiers off at war. And this was actually seen as a patriotic duty. And then in the 50s, you have knitting becoming high fashion because of better yarns and more colors. And it was seen as a useful skill, even taught in school. Okay, then you hit the feminist movement in the 1970s. And this is when women were encouraged to be free from domestic slavery. And this is really a necessary and good step because women had been trapped often in horrible situations, no way out, such limited opportunities in a lot of ways. But one of the side effects for knitting is that it really fell out of vogue, and it was seen as outdated and a sign of oppression. And so for about 20 years, it wasn't very popular at all. And then in the late 1990s, you have a huge knitting revival. Third wave feminism, which is what we're in now, is really all about choice and all about honoring women, whatever they're doing. And so knitting is seen as a way to honor all those women that I just told you about, hundreds of years worth of women who had been knitting for their families, knitting as an industry, and they weren't recognized for it. It wasn't really seen as valuable or a contribution. And so as I knit today, and I've only been knitting for about a year, but I see it as a way to honor those women that were taken for granted and overlooked. And I think by learning a little bit of what they had mastered, I honor them. And they kept generations of hands and feet and heads and even torsos warm. And I like to do the same for the people I love. And when I do, I recognize those women. I see them. Handcrafting builds relationships. And I mentioned in my introduction that my mom taught me how to sew. And knowledge is passed down from person to person. instruction in handcrafting. And I've learned a couple of crafts through books, and I'm here to tell you it is so much easier to learn from a person than a book. And when you do that, you really bond with that person and you grow that relationship. And recently I've been hand sewing a quilt, and my 8-year-old son Xander has been pestering me until I taught him how to hand sew. And so he pieced and then quilted his own quilt for his favorite stuffed animal, and he sat next to me for hours and did that. And it was really a unique bonding experience that we would not have had if crafting hadn't been in our life. And when you use a handmade blanket or a piece of clothing, you're really reminded of the person who made it. And that's a connection that you will have through that object that you wouldn't have if you just bought that from a store. Crafting is often done in a group. From old-time quilting bees to like modern-day crafting nights or knitting nights, it's really a great time to chat with your friends, make new friends, and keep your hands busy doing something productive. And a lot of times the crafts that are done this way are donated to charities. The Craft Yarn Council reported in 2009 that almost 50% of knitters had made at least one item for charity in the past year. And that's really another great way that handmade things build our communities and show our love for one another. Because of my blog, I've been able to connect to people from all around the world. I once received a package from Germany that had a handcrafted thing, and I've sent one to Brazil. And to be able to connect with people around the world that I would never otherwise meet through crafting is really amazing. When I look at my visitors map, it lights up with places all around the world. Japan, Malaysia, Russia, Chile, Dubai, Colombia, Iceland are just some of the places that I get visitors from. Crafting is a global obsession, and it creates global connections between people. Handcrafting gives you something that is uniquely yours, and I think this is probably my favorite thing about crafting. When you take a pattern and you choose your combination of materials, you are going to come up with something that nobody else will. Your sense of color and proportion and pattern and design, all of these things add up to make something that nobody else is going to make. And I think that's something that you're going to be proud of. It's an amazing connection that you wouldn't have if you went out and bought something in the store. You would never have that connection that you have when you make something. And hand making something really gives you the opportunity to adapt that object to your needs. I bought a beautiful dress last March because my husband and I were going on a cruise without the kids, but I needed a shrug to cover my shoulders. And so we went to literally every store in the mall, but nothing worked with that dress. And so I finally thought of knitting something. And so I bought some beautiful alpaca and silk yarn, and I knit this cover up that I'm wearing right now. And it was the perfect size for me and the perfect color and style for my dress, and no one else is ever going to have anything like it. I love to sew and design the patterns for clothes for me and my daughter, and she's started to get really opinionated and into the process of this, picking fabrics and that kind of thing. And her little quirk right now is that she loves pockets. And 3-year-olds are not rational beings, and if she wants pockets, she is not getting dressed without pockets. And this is her unique expression. And so because of my sewing skills, I'm going to be able to put pockets in things that would not normally have pockets. And really that's an expression of her and her unique personality. All right, in conclusion, I often have family or friends who would really like to try a craft, but they're worried that it won't turn out perfectly. And I promise you that I have never made one perfect thing. And I think that is the beauty of making things yourself. It's really about the imperfections that prove it was made with love. Handcrafting, like I said, it connects me to the past. It builds relationships with other people. And it's a way to bring art and self-expression into our daily lives that we really don't have a lot of opportunity to do in our daily lives in the modern world. And that's really something that you can never buy.